Creative Services Industry Report published annually by the BOSS Group, Cella and InSource. We're really excited to share this year's highlights and additions with you. Leading the webinar today, we have myself, Jackie Schaefer of Cella, and my good colleague, Connor Smith of the BOSS Group.
Across the next 30 minutes or so, we'd like to take you through an overview of the survey, what we've added new this year, some of the data points that resonated with us, and additional resources to support you and your team. So let's jump right into the survey overview. This is the fourth year we published this report, and we're pleased to share that once again participation from creative leaders like yourselves has increased to 462 creative leaders of in-house creative teams. This report features the largest sample size of creative teams of any report available into our industry. Of our three organizations, the BOSS Group, Cella, and InSource are narrowly focused on serving the needs of in-house creative teams. Therefore, step one in our survey is to ensure that respondents indicate they are from the in-house community. Step two is to ensure the respondent is of level of leadership level. This can be difficult as titles and responsibilities vary greatly by organization, but we believe the most qualified information comes from those with an in-depth insight into the budget, staffing, technology, and plans of the group.
We've reorganized the report this year into 10 sections that you see here, and we hope it's going to help you find the information more easily, and you're going to find it faster. So department organization is things such as who do you report to, marketing, shared services, etc. Funding is things like chargeback, but this year we also get into things like your training budget. Department resourcing, how many people do you have, what types of staff members are they, service offerings, partnerships, looking at agencies, looking at production groups, etc. Your global operations, a brand new section this year, processes, technology, values and challenges of the in-house team, and a section we're really excited to share with you this year is the creative leader job market. Once again, we're really pleased to include articles written by active in-house leaders. We've got 6 articles this year, which we've categorized and called Perspectives from the Field. You'll find them easily as they're called out in the table of contents, but for those of us creatives, the easiest way to find them is to look for the full bleed blue pages. So we were fortunate enough this year to include articles from Tracy Pearson and Paul Knockin at Chevron. They wrote about how they choose whether to start a service or discontinue an existing service. Carol Carter of BlackRock wrote about the challenge of merging 3 teams, each separated by different multiple time zones, into one global team. Tony Fernandez Jr. of Marriott Vacations Worldwide, he wrote about the point when automation can become harmful instead of helpful. And Annika Vaughn of the International Monetary Fund, also known as the IMF, wrote about the hard work and time it takes to implement a project management system, especially when it's one that allows for a lot of customization. And in his article, Andy Epstein, who is a studio manager of the BOSS Group's team at Merck, he responded to industry news articles that have been published in the past year that have either questioned the in-house team's capabilities or spoke about the rise of in-house teams' popularity. And lastly, Bob Cavano of A&E Networks has written an article that may resonate with many creative leaders, how finding a new job is challenging and sometimes requires an unconventional approach. We want to take a few minutes to tell you how each page is set up because each page is jam-packed with a lot of information. So you see here A. A is the section you're in. Each section starts with an orange page, and in this case it would say technology. And when you're within the section, you'll see the header right there. B, this sometimes exists on some pages and not in others, but it's qualitative results that are coupled with best practices. Some sections, such as here in technology, have subsections. Technology has hardware, software, and others. D are the questions from the survey, and we've listed them here exactly as how they read in the survey. E are the key takeaways, related data points, supplemental information, just something we really want you to know and take away from that graph. In the graph, what's circled here or boxed here is in F is the fact that it has white text, and what we're showing here is that it's a significant majority response. Now, different, if you see G down below, that's white text because it is a significant majority response, but it's blue. And the reason it's blue here is, and we've done this on several graphs throughout the report, is it's a key takeaway. It is interesting. And not always does that also be the significant majority response. Sometimes it's a minority response that we want to point out to you. H down below, very difficult to see, I know, but I promise you it says N equals and a certain number, and that's the number of qualified responses we got to that question. A reminder, qualified means an in-house creative leader who reaches those leadership qualities that or titles that we had in the earlier part of the presentation. And then lastly, I. Here we have related resources, so blogs or white papers, et cetera, written and presented by either Cella, the Boss Group, or InSource.
Each year we have grown the report based on feedback we receive from you, so we're very happy that you're engaged in the content and give us feedback. This year was no exception. In fact, we grew the survey by 50% this year. We don't do this lightly, as we know it takes substantial time for you to respond to a 96-question survey, but your participation and feedback really tells us that you find this survey and this report to be valuable to you and your career. So thank you for the time you invest in making this report a success. As we mentioned, we are pleased to share that participation has increased by almost 300% since our inaugural report. More than 30 industries are represented in this report, and more than 50% of the Fortune 100 is represented in the results. So just an incredible sample size. So let's get into the good stuff. We told you we increased the number of questions by 50%. Let's take a look at what's new this year. As you can see, we've jumped onto the data visualization trend and are really pleased to include a 2-page infographics with highlights of the report. In follow-up to this webinar, you'll receive a PDF of the report as well as a 11 by 17 standalone version of the infographics. And if you don't, if you're not able to do that, you can always go to creativeindustryreport.com and download the webinar yourself.
In Cella's consulting engagements, we're regularly learning of what we consider to be unhealthy direct report ratios. So we asked 2 separate questions to research into direct report ratios. The first, how many direct reports does the senior-most creative leader have? So the top person in your creative organization. The majority response came in at 6 or more. And I think it's fair, and we probably all agree, to say that having 6 direct reports or more, oh goodness, more would be even harder, is really difficult, especially when you're charged with leading the department, setting out a vision, working on strategy. That's just a lot to handle. The good news is 69% of creative leaders have 5 or less, which is much more manageable when you're in that senior-most position. So hopefully this gives those of you who have 6 or more direct reports a little bit of ammunition to help change that situation. In follow-up, we also asked, on average, how many direct reports do the first or frontline managers have, so those more junior people on the team? Thankfully, we do see that junior managers often have less direct reports. There still are some in that 6 or more, but really the majority, 52%, have 3 or less direct reports, which could mean they're actually under-leveraged as managers. Typically between 4 to 6 is pretty much a sweet spot for frontline managers. Through the roundtables that the Boss Group and Cella holds, as well as events held by InSource, our leaders have been hearing a really consistent story that creative leaders and their teams don't have enough time to take advantage of training. We've also been hearing very disparate stories about funds for training, which led us to a few new survey questions. The first of which is, does your team even have an established training budget each year? 2/3 of teams either have explicit dollars or usually have training requests approved, which that's really good news. Though the fact that we're in this constantly evolving industry, I wish that number was higher. 67% is not really high enough to keep up with the pace of evolution. We also asked, for those of you who have training budgets, tell us about what that training budget is per person. And it's really across the board. You can see there's no clear story here, and the majority of response is one that is actually a little bit unfortunate and sad. But what we did learn from this is you start segmenting the data by team size. Teams with between 10 and 30 team members, which we qualify these as mid-sized teams, they have the highest per team member budgets of any of the team size segments we look at. The largest teams have the smallest per team member budget.
One area that I was very excited to see the responses and add to this year's report is a view on talent availability. We wanted to get your perspective on the availability of talent in the marketplace, and can you get the talent that you need to execute on your creative projects in a timely manner. This report identifies interactive and mobile designers as the hardest to find, followed by copywriters and traffic coordinators as the most difficult. This is something we're certainly seeing in the field at the Boss Group as well. However, I think we'd all agree that finding top-notch talent in any category can be challenging at times. We've historically asked about the services you provide, but in order to go deeper on this, we broke the question into two parts. Your traditional services, meaning those associated most often with print work and digital services. In the traditional services category, we've added a few new choices this year, which demonstrates how prevalent some of the services are. And whether we like it or not, I know you know which one I might be talking about here. PowerPoint is done by 72% of creative teams. Infographics is a new service called out this year with 76% of teams and creative teams creating them. And the third one I want to call out is marketing and communication strategy. Almost 2/3 of teams are providing this service, and that's really impressive, as getting a seat at the table is critical to becoming a coveted strategic partner, and I know we all aspire to be that. In the digital category, the first thing that stands out as the most prevalent response is web design at 70%. To us, this supports what we regularly hear about the ongoing struggle of separating creative teams based on output and not recognizing the value of the upfront input these groups have in common, not to mention the synergies possible if the teams work together. We also asked where you felt your team would be providing increased services in the coming year or years. Not surprisingly, interactive design, mobile design, and video production were the top responses. And certainly if you were to ask me blindly before I saw the results, I would have guessed that number one would have been video, as there's certainly a lot of action in the space right now as it relates to video and video production. For the first time, we polled you on your team's scope of work. It is really great news to see that 95% of teams list their industry's primary scope of work as Tier 1 or Tier 2 work, meaning the majority of the work the teams are producing are not template production style work. Rather, your teams are focused on original creative or executing creative concepts across new deliverables. In addition, the majority of creative teams are producing the majority of their work for an external audience, with only 16% focused on mostly internal communications.
Too often, I've heard about creative teams, or heard creative teams, being criticized for a lack of photo choices. But really, when you dig to the bottom of that critique, you learn that they have a limited budget for stock photography. Custom photography isn't happening. They just don't have a lot of resources, so they end up with photography that we've seen in a few other places. And even at Fortune 500s, I've heard this. I think we all agree and know that in order for a brand to stand out, the photography should have a consistent point of view and be unique. So it needs to be custom. So to help groups in the position I described, we polled how often companies were commissioning custom photography, and we learned that 2/3 of creative teams are doing it at least annually. Another pain point for creative teams is prioritization. All of our clients want everything yesterday, or possibly 3 days ago. And unfortunately, sometimes we're left trying to figure out what's the most important to do, and that's not necessarily our position to make that call. Therefore, it's not surprising that deadlines were listed as the most important driver of prioritization. Another pain point for creative teams are those quick-term projects. Projects that need to be in and out in less than 24 hours, sometimes need to be out in less than 4 hours. So you can see something I'm really excited about is 52% of teams actually have a process in place to address quick turns. And an even better 10% has a dedicated team to address quick-term projects. That's a fantastic place to be and a really great place as far as the maturity scale of in-house creative teams. At the end of the day, it's nearly impossible for our creative teams to do everything for our organizations, especially given that 58% of your teams have 10 or less people. And honestly, there's reasons that external agencies make sense to use. What I'd like to hear, though, is that 75% of in-house creative teams are partnering with external agencies. You're part of the process. I don't know exactly what part of the process based on this survey, but you're not being completely missed. You have an opportunity to give input. The next one here is around, does your group partner with offshore or off-site creative and production service providers? And approximately 1/3 of creative teams are doing this. If you can get to the position where you have a trusted production team to send your overflow work to, or potentially specific types of your work, and you're able to focus your team on higher value or more creative work, this is, again, another place in the maturity scale that helps your team evolve. The prevalence of multi-location and global scale teams has been a hot topic. Discussion forums, our consulting engagements here at Cella, we're hearing it a lot. I even heard one client say to us, why haven't people cracked this nut yet? And I've got a lot of opinions on that, but that's not what the survey here is about. What's really difficult for in-house leaders is managing more than one location. So we want to see, how common is it? You can see that 70% of creative leaders are managing one single location. So they're fairly lucky as far as having to deal with multiple time zones, several different countries, et cetera. It becomes more and more difficult the more locations you have. Approximately, or exactly 30% of creative teams have multiple locations, but only 9% have locations both domestically and internationally. What is interesting, and makes a lot of sense, but 64% of those groups with international teams, they're doing it to be able to support their local business partners. Less popular responses, but equally important to a lot of organizations, is taking advantage of the low-cost labor markets outside of the domestic location of the company, and also providing more hours to provide kind of the follow-the-sun approach, where your team doesn't have to kill themselves to be able to provide 20 hours of coverage. It's just your team is across multiple locations allowing that. This is that new section I said that we're really proud to present. Our organizations have the pleasure of being able to partner with creative leaders across the country. We've got a really good pulse on who's looking for a new role and the challenges that these leaders are having as they look for a new role. We all know the field we work in is relatively small, and the number of very senior roles is somewhat limited, especially if you're in a position where you don't want to move. You want to stay within 45 minutes of your home or somewhat. So we want to take a look at not just the people who've been talking to us about, hey, I'm looking for something new, I'm in the market, but really, what does the greater community look like as far as their job satisfaction? I think it's not so great news, because here just 16% are extremely satisfied. I mean, 50% more are mostly satisfied, and that's a good thing. But that still leaves us with 1/3 of leaders who would definitely take the call of a recruiter should the phone ring. And you might argue that that other 50% would also take the phone call of a recruiter. So with more than 20% of creative leaders looking for a new job, either actively or passively, we ask those folks, how confident are you in the availability of opportunities for your role? And a large some are not. More than half expressed they weren't confident. That's a really tough reality that a lot of us are facing right now. If you go deeper into this data in the report, we asked folks, what do you think your next job could be in? And only 70% felt that their next career move could be within another in-house agency. Many are considering external agencies, other areas in marketing communication, and even self-employment. So we have heard time and time again through this survey that career pathing for yourselves and for your teams is a real pain point, and this data further illustrates that point. If we went through all the new 34 questions in this webinar, you'd be here for 3 hours. So instead, we picked the highlights, but we'd like to tell you what else is new. We surveyed on hardware types. Is your team using PCs? Are they using Macs? What dictates what they use? How often are you upgrading the hardware and software? Who supports your IT? Do you have a dedicated Mac person? If you're on a Mac, does your IT department do it? Is it external? Dedicated account services team members. Do you have folks whose number one and only job is to be an account manager or a project manager, or are people wearing multiple hats? What type of advertising support is your team providing? National campaigns, regional, local, etc. And lastly, are you documenting your workflows? Lots of great stuff in the new report.
So with all that great stuff, we'd like to take the opportunity to take you through some of the findings that stood out to us. First is team size, and here's one we're really excited about. The size of in-house teams is growing. We've heard through other industry resources that the number of teams is growing, but it's also great to hear teams are growing in size as well. Mid-sized teams and large teams, which include teams of 11 or more, now comprise 43% of in-house teams, and this is up from 31% in the previous year, so a rather significant increase. This commitment to growth demonstrates the value our organizations place on our team and our products. While this growth is occurring, it's not occurring via full-time team members. And when I say full-time, I'm talking about salaried employees of your organization, not people working 40 hours a week on another firm's payroll. This is not a surprise to us here at BLR, Cella, and the Boss Group, as we've heard throughout this economic recovery that companies are reluctant to add fixed costs to their P&L. By adding contingent labor, these costs are categorized as variable costs, which is currently deemed more attractive to boards and shareholders. Many creative teams are adding what we call permalancers. These are temps or freelancers that are on site 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. This brings many of the same benefits as full-time employees, but it doesn't add that extra cost to the fixed cost lines, again, pleasing boards and shareholders.
All right, hopefully I'm not overstating how excited I am and how excited I think you're going to be by this next data point. And for those of you who know me, I get dorked out over data, so excuse the excitement. But we're regularly asked, how many projects do teams my size do each year? And I hate and I love the question. I hate it because it's not apples to apples. Some groups of 10 people create 5,000 projects a year. Other groups of 10 people create 300. They each have different missions. The one group might be doing tons of one-pagers. The other one might be doing, 50 videos a year. So your products change so much. It's really hard just to blindly ask, how many projects do you do a year? That being said, I love the question because there are some trends. I just don't want you guys to make any business decisions off this data. So with that caveat, I'll now show you the data. If you follow the blue bars, you'll see the trends. Small teams are most often producing 1,000 or less projects. Mid-sized teams are somewhere between 500 and 2,000 more than 50% of the time. Right on down, large teams, those with between 31 and 50, looks like 60% of them are doing between 2,000 and 4,000 projects. And then the mega teams, and there you see it's actually a little bit more dispersed across the chart here. The majority is more than 8,000, but there is no 50% kind of side-by-side in the responses, so a lot more variety in the mega teams. We always ask the question around funding models, and as the sample size has grown year over year, the response hasn't changed a lot. Approximately, just about 30% year over year tend to charge back at one level or another. The really interesting piece of the data is when you cut it by team size. And here's one cut. We look at mega-sized teams, so those of 50 or more. It's the inverse 30% are not a chargeback. 70% are charging back at some level. So many of you have heard me preach about this one before, and I've seen it in action. You know, creative teams have one perception of their clients' feedback, but then when you introduce some sort of performance survey, perception and reality don't always match. And that's okay, because the point of performance benchmarking and surveying your clients is to learn how you can improve and how you can evolve your team and your services to meet the business's needs. So I'm a little bit disheartened to see that 52% of you never survey your clients. It is such an easy thing to do and can make a world of difference to your team's future. So remember, there's lots of ways to do it, but one way you can do it is through Cella's Partner Pulse product. It's a great product that allows you to benchmark your own team, benchmark them against other in-house teams, and even external agencies. But this is too easy a topic not to put on your radar and make one part of your 2014 goals if you're part of that 52%. The top 5 challenges for creative leaders have remained the same from 2013 to 2014, and affecting client behaviors is the top challenge. Below that, we have career pathing for yourself and staff, which we addressed a little bit earlier, getting respect from your internal clients, value recognition, and adequate funding for staff. What I found interesting in looking at this is 70% of you have challenges with affecting your clients' behaviors. 70% of you also are not chargeback organizations. So I cut the data to see, do chargeback organizations have better luck in that category? But they didn't. It really was nominally different. It was a little bit better for chargeback organizations, but not enough that we call it out anywhere but in this conversation. So that is a challenge regardless of your chargeback status. And as I've said before, you know, being a chargeback has lots of great benefits and lots of drawbacks, but it is not a silver bullet to your challenges.
With that, we want to share some resources available outside of the report with you. First, let me speak about the Boss Group, if I may. The Boss Group is an award-winning creative staffing firm for interactive creative and marketing talent. We've been doing this for over 25 years, have offices in 7 locations, are proud to say we're a Diamond Award winner from Innovera's Best of Staffing, the only creative staffing firm that can say that, and have a suite of proprietary assessments to ensure that you always get the quality creative talent that you need. If you're interested in learning more about the Boss Group, please visit thebossgroup.com. I also want to invite you to check out CreativeConnects.com. Creative Connects is a networking series in a happy hour format, which brings like creatives together in a rather informal environment to exchange best practices, industry trends, and just some good old-fashioned networking. To find an event near you, again, go to CreativeConnects.com, and you will find the next date and establishment where we're holding that event.
In a similar vein, the Boss Group and Cella partnered to bring Creative Execs Roundtable series to you. This event is focused for creative leaders in the in-house industry. We've got 4 more events this spring. We've just finished up 2 this week, and we'd like to invite you to join us in Dallas, Chicago, Philadelphia, or New Jersey. You can find out more at our website at cellaconsulting.com. In the center of the website at the bottom, you'll see upcoming events. We also have a blog. If you're not receiving it already, you can subscribe to the blog here in the upper right to receive our latest articles. We publish once weekly, and again, it's just focused on issues 100% that the creative leader is faced with. In addition to our blog and the roundtables, we'd love to share more with you about what we do to help in-house creative teams evolve from that place of order taker to strategic partner through the use of technologies, process, and people. And InSource, if you're not a member of InSource yet, what are you waiting for? InSource is a free group that is a nonprofit and allows you to network with your peers, offers a lot of content on their website, and they offer a ton of events. So check out insource.org, and that's in-source.org for more information. With that, we'd really like to thank you for your time this afternoon. We look forward to sharing the full version of the report with you. You can download the full version of the report at www.creativeindustry.com. Have a great rest of your day.